How do you fight for someone who refuses to see the truth? Have you ever loved someone through their self-destruction? Tell me your story. A knock at the door interrupted them. A delivery man entered with an enormous bouquet of flowers and a card. For the new parents from Whitman Industries, he announced cheerfully before leaving them alone with the celebration they couldn't feel. Cole opened the card, his face darkening as he read. My business partner sent congratulations. So happy you finally got your miracle. Finally got my miracle. He looked at her with eyes that had gone cold. How many people have you told about my condition, Tasha? What are you talking about? How many people know I was supposed to be sterile? How many people are going to do the math and wonder whose children these really are? They're your children. The words came out as a shout, waking both babies, who began crying in unison. She tried to comfort Marcus while reaching for Michael, her movements clumsy with pain and medication. They're your sons, Cole. Your DNA, your stubborn personality already showing your... Stop. He held up his hand like her words were weapons. Just stop. I can't listen to this anymore. Then what are you going to do? The question hung in the air while their newborn sons cried and their marriage crumbled around them. Cole's answer came not in words, but in action. He gathered his jacket and headed for the door. Where are you going? I need time to think, to figure out what's real and what's not. What about us? What about them? She gestured to the babies, who were finally settling back into sleep. Cole paused at the door, his hand on the handle. For a moment, she thought he might turn around, might come back and hold his children, might choose faith over fear. Instead, he said the words that would echo in her nightmares for 20 years. I'll be in touch through my lawyer. The door closed behind him with a soft click that sounded like the end of everything. When the private investigator's report landed on their kitchen table 2 weeks later, photos of her daily routine, searching for evidence of affairs that never existed, she finally understood. He wasn't just doubting the children. He was planning his escape. He didn't just leave. He orchestrated her destruction with the precision of a business merger. The private investigator's report was thorough. She had to give Cole credit for that. 43 pages documenting 6 weeks of her life in excruciating detail. Photos of her grocery shopping, visiting her mother, taking the babies to pediatrician appointments. Phone records showing calls to her sister, her doctor, the pharmacy. Bank statements proving she bought nothing more suspicious than diapers and infant formula. No secret lovers. No mysterious meetings. No evidence of the affair he desperately wanted to believe in. But absence of evidence wasn't enough for Cole. If anything, the clean report seemed to make him angrier, like she was guilty of being too careful rather than innocent. This proves nothing, he said, slapping the folder on their kitchen table where she was trying to pump breast milk while the twins slept upstairs. Someone determined to hide an affair would know how to avoid detection. Listen to yourself, Cole. You hired someone to follow me, the mother of your newborn children, looking for proof of cheating that doesn't exist. And when they found nothing, you decided that was suspicious too. What exactly would convince you? A DNA test. The words hung between them like a death sentence. She set down the pump, her hands shaking with exhaustion and disbelief. You want to test your own children's paternity. I want to know the truth. The truth is sitting upstairs in matching cribs. The truth is I haven't slept more than 2 hours at a time in 6 weeks because I'm taking care of your children. The truth is I love you and I've never betrayed you and I can't understand how we got here. But Cole had already moved past conversation into action. The DNA tests were scheduled for the following week to be conducted by a lab of his choosing, with results sent directly to his attorney. He'd also changed the passwords on their joint accounts, limiting her access to grocery money and baby supplies. When someone tries to rewrite your story, how do you hold on to the truth? Share how you've survived betrayal in the comments. I'm protecting myself, he explained when she confronted him about the financial restrictions. And I'm protecting my assets until we know what we're dealing with. Your assets? What about our assets? Our marriage? Our family? That depends on the test results. But even as they waited for science to confirm what her heart already knew, Cole was preparing for war. She found legal documents in his briefcase, divorce papers already drawn up, custody agreements that gave him everything and left her with nothing. He'd been planning this exit strategy for months, maybe since the day she told him she was pregnant. The Miami model appeared 2 weeks before the test results came back. Her name was Sophia Cruz, and she was everything Tasha wasn't. Blonde, tall, 10 years younger, and completely unencumbered by children or complicated histories. Cole introduced her as a business consultant, but Tasha caught them kissing in his car when he thought she wasn't looking. Really, Cole? You couldn't even wait for the DNA results before moving on. This isn't about you, Tasha. It's about me building a new life with someone who doesn't come with complications. Complications? Is that what you call your sons now? I call them question marks. And I don't build my future on uncertainty. The test results arrived on a Tuesday. 99.7% probability of paternity for both boys. Cole stared at the papers for a long time, and for a moment, Tasha thought science might save their marriage. Instead, he looked up at her with empty eyes and said, "This doesn't change anything. Too much has happened. Too much doubt. I can't get past it. Can't or won't. Does it matter?" The courtroom felt like a morgue, all marble and mahogany, where their love story was dissected like evidence in a criminal case. Every intimate moment they'd shared was twisted into something ugly. Her pregnancy was reframed as suspicious timing. Her fidelity became calculated deception. Her love for him was portrayed as manipulation for financial gain. Cole's lawyer painted her as a gold digger who trapped a successful man with convenient pregnancies. Her own attorney, court-appointed because she couldn't afford better, barely put up a fight. As the judge awarded him everything, house, business, savings, even their wedding photos, Cole looked at her with the cold calculation of a CEO closing a bad deal. "This isn't personal, Tasha. It's just business." She didn't know then that karma was already growing in his new girlfriend's womb, or that 20 years later, everything he thought he knew about genetics and family would come knocking at her door, looking for the forgiveness he'd never deserved. She only knew that love had died, and she was left to raise their children from the ashes of everything they'd built together. They took everything except the one thing that mattered: her refusal to stay broken. The tiny apartment above the art supply store smelled of paint and possibility, canvases stacked against every wall while her sons did homework at a card table, their laughter filling spaces that wealth never could. 3-year-old Marcus was teaching Michael how to hold a crayon, both boys covered in more paint than the paper they were supposed to be decorating. "Mama, look." Marcus held up his masterpiece, a stick figure family with 3 people and a dog they didn't own yet. "It's us. Where's Daddy?" Michael asked innocently, the question that still cut through her chest like broken glass even 2 years after the divorce. "Daddy's lost right now, baby," she replied, kneeling beside their makeshift art table. "But that doesn't mean he doesn't love you. Sometimes people hurt the ones they love because they're hurting inside." It was the same explanation she'd given them 100 times, trying to protect their hearts from the truth, that their father had walked away not because he was lost, but because he'd chosen a different path entirely. One that led to Miami penthouses and younger women and a life scrubbed clean of the complications they represented. "Will he find us?" Marcus asked, his dark eyes, so much like Cole's, filled with the hope that kept her awake at night. Maybe someday. The lie tasted bitter, but what was the alternative? Telling 2 toddlers that their father thought they were mistakes? That he'd rather pretend they didn't exist than accept responsibility for their lives? How do you explain betrayal to children? How do you teach them to love themselves when someone rejected them? Parents, share your wisdom. The art supply store downstairs had become their salvation. Mrs. Chun, the elderly owner, had offered Tasha the apartment rent-free in exchange for managing the store and teaching weekend art classes to neighborhood kids. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but it was theirs, built from determination and the belief that they deserved better than the scraps Cole had left behind. Her online art business was slowly growing. The paintings she created after midnight, when the boys were asleep and her emotions had nowhere to hide. Sold to collectors who appreciated raw honesty over polished technique. Pieces titled Abandoned and Starting Over and mother's love brought in enough money to buy groceries and pay for daycare when she taught classes. The irony wasn't lost on her. Cole had tried to destroy her financially, but his betrayal had unleashed a creativity she'd never accessed while comfortable and secure. Pain, it turned out, was excellent motivation. Mrs. Brooks, a voice from the store's entrance, interrupted her thoughts. She looked up to see David Martinez, a single father from the neighborhood whose daughter attended her Saturday art classes. "Just Tasha, please. What can I help you with?" He smiled, holding up a bottle of wine. "I was wondering if you'd like to have dinner sometime. Nothing fancy, just adult conversation and food that doesn't come in colorful boxes." David was attractive in a quiet way. Kind eyes, steady job at the post office, the kind of man who showed up when he said he would. The kind of man Cole had pretended to be before revealing his true nature. "That's sweet of you to ask," she said carefully, "but I'm not really dating right now. Because of the boys? Because of me? I'm still figuring out who I am without." She gestured vaguely, not wanting to explain the wreckage of her marriage to someone who seemed to have his life together. "Fair enough. But if you change your mind, the offer stands. No pressure." After he left, she stood in the store, surrounded by art supplies and possibilities, wondering if she'd ever be ready to trust someone again. Cole had taken more than their money and their house. He'd stolen her ability to believe in forever. But watching her sons create beauty from nothing more than crayons and imagination, she felt something she'd forgotten existed. Pride. Not in what she'd lost, but in what she was building. Not in the woman she'd been, but in the mother she was becoming. The day her first major painting sold for more than Cole ever paid in child support. A piece called Phoenix that showed a woman rising from flames with children in her arms. She felt something shift inside her chest. She had no idea that across the country, his empire was beginning to crumble, built as it was on the same lies and denials that had destroyed their marriage. But for now, in their paint-scented apartment with art covering the walls and her son's laughter echoing off the ceiling, she was exactly where she needed to be. Home. She built her new life on the lie that he was sterile, until her son was born looking exactly like the children he abandoned. Miami Beach, Florida, July 2010. The penthouse gleamed with chrome and glass, overlooking waters that sparkled like the life Cole thought he wanted. Sophia Cruz stood on the balcony, watching boats, the horizon, while her 4-year-old son James played with expensive toys that couldn't fill the silence between them. Cole found her there, drink in hand, staring at nothing. "The Miami Herald called," he said, settling beside her on the designer patio furniture that cost more than most people's cars. "They want to do a feature on the company's expansion. Tech Mobile's Fresh Start, or something like that." "Fresh Start," Sophia repeated, not looking at him. "Is that what we're calling it? What else would we call it?" She turned toward him, and in the afternoon light, he could see the exhaustion she'd been hiding behind makeup and forced smiles. "I'd call it running away. But that's just me." Before he could respond, James ran over, breathless from playing. "Daddy Cole, look what I built." He held up a structure made of blocks, towers connected by bridges in a design that showed unusual creativity for his age. "That's impressive, buddy." Cole's voice carried the affection he'd never been able to give his older children, the warmth that had died somewhere between doubt and divorce papers. But as James grinned up at him, that crooked, lighting up his whole face smile, something cold settled in Cole's chest. The resemblance was impossible to ignore. The boy had Sophia's blonde hair and fair skin, but his eyes, his smile, the way he tilted his head when thinking, all of it echoed the twins he'd left behind in Ohio. "Sophia." His voice came out rougher than he intended. "We need to talk." She must have heard something in his tone because she immediately tensed. "James, go wash your hands for dinner." When they were alone, Cole studied the woman who'd helped him rebuild his life after the destruction of his marriage. Beautiful, uncomplicated, young enough to believe his stories about fresh starts and new beginnings. Young enough not to ask too many questions about the family he'd left behind. "How old was James when we met?" The question came out like an accusation. "What kind of question is that?" "A simple one. How old?" Sophia's perfectly manicured fingers tightened around her wine glass. You know how old? He was 6 months. I told you his father wasn't in the picture. Because you didn't know who his father was, or because you knew and he wasn't available? The silence stretched between them, filled with the sound of waves against the building and James's voice echoing from inside the apartment as he played. When you realize you've destroyed something precious over a lie, is redemption possible? What would you do with that knowledge? Cole, what's this about? It's about the fact that your son looks exactly like the children I convinced myself weren't mine. It's about timing and genetics and the possibility that I've been lying to myself for years. Sophia set down her glass with shaking hands. You said you were sterile. You said children were impossible for you. I said a lot of things. Doesn't make them true. The confession hung between them like a loaded gun. James's laughter drifted from inside the apartment, innocent and joyful, unaware that his world was about to change. So what are you saying? Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. I'm saying I need a DNA test. I'm saying I might have destroyed the wrong family. I'm saying he couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't voice the possibility that had been growing in his mind since the day James took his first steps. With the same determined expression Marcus and Michael had worn in the home videos he'd deleted but never forgotten. The DNA test results would arrive in 2 weeks, trembling in his hands like Judgment Day. 99.9% probability of paternity. 20 years too late. He finally had proof that biology was more mysterious than his fear, more persistent than his denial. But his Miami paradise was about to become his prison. Success built on lies crumbles faster than love destroyed by doubt. The headline screamed his downfall across financial magazines, while his office windows offered a view of the city that no longer welcomed him. Tech giant's spectacular fall, from millions to meltdown, the rise and crash of Cole Whitman. Each article dissected his company's collapse with the same precision he'd once used to destroy his marriage. It started with a whistleblower, a former employee who revealed that Whitman Industries had been inflating user numbers and fabricating success metrics to attract investors. The SEC investigation followed quickly, freezing assets and exposing years of creative accounting that made Cole look less like a visionary and more like a fraud. But the professional destruction was nothing compared to the personal avalanche that followed. I'm leaving, Sophia announced one Tuesday morning, her suitcases already packed and waiting by the door. I'm taking James, and we're going to stay with my sister in California until I figure out what's next. Cole looked up from the legal documents that covered their dining room table like evidence of his crimes. We can work through this. The lawyers say you're going to prison, Cole. Maybe not for long, but long enough. She picked up James, who clung to her with the instinct of a child who sensed danger. I can't do this. I can't raise him in this chaos. He's my son, too. Is he? The question cut deeper than she probably intended. Because for 4 years, you've treated him like a replacement for the family you threw away. Like he was proof that you made the right choice. But we both know the truth now, don't we? The DNA results had confirmed what his heart had been denying. James was his biological child, born while Cole was busy convincing himself that fatherhood was impossible. The test that should have brought relief instead brought crushing recognition of his pattern, abandoning families when they became inconvenient. Do you believe in karma? When bad choices catch up with us, is it justice or just life? Share your thoughts on consequences. I made mistakes, he said, reaching for James, who turned away and buried his face in his mother's shoulder. But I'm trying to fix them. You can't fix 20 years of denial with a DNA test, Cole. You can't rebuild trust with people you've already destroyed. Sophia's voice was sad rather than angry, which somehow made it worse. And you can't love James the way he deserves when you're still carrying guilt about Marcus and Michael. Sterile wealthy CEO left her and kids for another woman. 20 years later, he knocked on her door. Her hand froze on the deadbolt. 20 years. 20 years since he'd stood in a courtroom and told a judge she was unfaithful, that the twins couldn't possibly be his children because he was sterile. 20 years since he'd stripped her of everything they'd built together and disappeared to Miami with a younger woman. What would you do if your worst betrayal knocked on your door begging for help? Hi, viewers. Kindly tell us where you're watching from and what time it is. Warm welcome to the family. Enjoy the story. She opened the door to find the man who destroyed her life 20 years ago, holding a child who looked exactly like the sons he claimed weren't his. The same eyes that once promised forever now pleaded for forgiveness, while trembling fingers gripped a boy who shared her children's smile. He whispered 3 words that shattered everything she thought she knew. I was wrong. What would you do if your worst betrayal knocked on your door begging for help? Have you ever been abandoned by someone who swore they loved you? Have you watched someone walk away from their own children? Tonight, we're diving into a story about the lies we tell ourselves and the truths that destroy us. Stay until the end to discover the secret that changes everything about love, betrayal, and second chances. Hit that like button if you've ever faced your past unexpectedly, and subscribe for stories that will make you question everything you thought you knew about forgiveness. Let me take you back to where this devastating love story began. 20 years of healing shattered in the 3 seconds it took to recognize his face. November rain drummed against the windows of her warm kitchen, where family photos lined the walls. Twins graduating, birthdays, moments of joy he'd missed. Her art studio hummed with success she'd built from nothing, canvases stacked with paintings that sold for more than he ever paid in child support. At 45, Tasha Brooks had finally made peace with her past. Then the doorbell cut through the peace like a blade. She wasn't expecting anyone. Her sons were at college. Her neighbors knew better than to drop by unannounced, and delivery drivers always called first. Something about the sound felt different, desperate, urgent, like whoever stood on her porch couldn't wait another second. Through the peephole, she saw a man's silhouette, hunched against the storm. Tall, familiar in a way that made her stomach drop. When he turned slightly, catching the porch light, her blood turned to ice. Cole Whitman, her ex-husband, the man who walked away from their marriage, their children, their entire life together, because he convinced himself she was a cheater and his sons weren't really his. Her hand froze on the deadbolt. 20 years. 20 years since he'd stood in a courtroom and told a judge she was unfaithful, that the twins couldn't possibly be his children because he was sterile. 20 years since he'd stripped her of everything they'd built together and disappeared to Miami with a younger woman. Despite 20 years and the hatred she'd nursed like a wound, her body remembered his presence. The way he held his shoulders when he was nervous, the slight tilt of his head when he was thinking. Even broken and desperate, he still moved like the man who'd once traced promises on her skin in the darkness of their bedroom. Her chest tightened with unwanted recognition, her pulse quickening in a way that made her angry at herself. Some memories lived in your bones, refusing to die no matter how much pain they'd caused. "Go away, Cole," she called through the door, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. "Please, Tasha, I need to talk to you." His voice cracked like he'd been crying. "It's important. It's about the kids. Our kids are fine. No thanks to you." She leaned against the door, fighting the urge to look through the peephole again. "You lost the right to ask about them when you abandoned them." "I know. God, I know. But please, just let me explain." "Explain what?" "How you called me a whore in open court. How you took our house, our savings, everything we worked for. How you left your 3-year-old sons asking why Daddy didn't love them anymore." Silence stretched between them, broken only by the rain and her racing heartbeat. She should walk away, should go back to her tea and her paintings and her carefully rebuilt life. But something in his voice held her frozen at the door, a brokenness that matched what he'd left behind in her. "I was wrong," he whispered, so quietly she almost missed it. "About everything. About you. About them. About what I could and couldn't do." Before she could respond, a small voice piped up from outside. "Daddy, I'm cold." Tasha's breath caught. Daddy? Cole had a child? After swearing for years that he was sterile, after destroying their family over that lie, he'd had another child? Would you slam the door or demand answers? Tell me what your first reaction would be in the comments below. Her curiosity won over her anger. She unlocked the deadbolt and cracked the door open, keeping the chain latched. Cole stood on her porch, soaked through and looking like he'd aged a decade in the past few years. His expensive clothes were wrinkled, his face gaunt with exhaustion and something deeper, grief, maybe, or shame. But it was the child beside him that made her knees nearly buckle. A little boy, maybe 4 years old, with dark curls plastered to his head by rain. He looked up at her with eyes the exact shade of brown as her twin sons, the same shape, the same long lashes. Even the way he smiled, crooked, lighting up his whole face, was identical to Marcus and Michael at that age. The boy stepped forward, rain dripping from his small coat, and when he smiled, that crooked, familiar grin, Tasha felt the earth shift beneath her feet. "Mama," Cole whispered, his voice breaking on the word. "I think this is your grandson. Some lies are so perfect, you don't know you're living in them until the truth walks through your door holding proof." Atlanta, Georgia, September 2005. The hotel ballroom sparkled with crystal and ambition. Tech moguls and artists mingling like oil and water at the annual Business Innovation Summit. Tasha Brooks stood at the edge of the crowd, nursing a whiskey neat and wondering why she'd let her business partner convince her to attend. She was 25, broke, and trying to build an online art platform with nothing but determination and credit card debt. Her vintage dress, the only formal wear she owned, felt out of place among the designer gowns and power suits. She was about to slip out early when a voice beside her ordered the same drink. "Whiskey neat, and make it a double." She turned to find a man about her age, tall and lean with dark hair that looked like he'd been running his fingers through it. His suit was expensive, but his tie was loose, his sleeves rolled up like he'd given up trying to look perfect. When he caught her staring, he smiled, crooked, lighting up his whole face in a way that made her stomach flip. "Rough night?" she asked, nodding toward his drink. "Rough year," he replied, extending his hand. "Cole Whitman. And you are?" "Tasha Brooks. And apparently we have the same taste in liquid courage." He laughed, a sound that cut through the cocktail party chatter and made other conversations seem less important. "What are you running from? Besides this party?" "I'm not running from anything. I'm running towards something. Just haven't figured out what yet." She studied his face, noting the intelligence in his dark eyes, the way he seemed to be calculating something behind his easy smile. "What about you? You look like a man with a plan." "I am. Or I was. Now I'm not so sure." He gestured toward the crowd of networking executives. "Everyone here thinks they know what the future looks like. Tech solutions for everything, algorithms that can predict human behavior, systems that eliminate uncertainty. But you don't believe that. I believe in controlled variables, measured risks, predictable outcomes." His gaze held hers. "But then someone like you shows up and reminds me that the most interesting things can't be programmed." The compliment should have felt like a line, but something in his delivery made it sound like discovery, like he was as surprised by his attraction as she was by hers. "Dance with me," he said suddenly. "I don't usually mix business with pleasure," she replied, even as she was already setting down her glass. "Neither do I," he murmured, leading her onto the dance floor. "But I'm learning to make exceptions." The band was playing something slow and jazz-influenced, the kind of music that made couples step closer together. His hands settled on her lower back, warm through the thin fabric of her dress, and she felt the solid strength of his chest against her palm. He moved with confidence, like he'd been dancing with her for years instead of minutes. Have you ever met someone and just known they'd change your life? Drop a heart if you believe in instant connection. "Tell me something real," she said as they swayed together. "Not your elevator pitch or your 5-year plan. Something that matters." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, "I don't usually let people get close. Not really close. I keep everyone at arm's length because it's safer that way." "Why?" "Because when you care about something, you can lose it. When you need someone, they can leave. When you trust completely." He spun her slowly, pulling her back against him. "You could be completely destroyed. That's a lonely way to live. It's a safe way to live." His eyes searched her face. "But maybe safety is overrated." The song ended, but neither of them stepped away. The space between them hummed with possibility and danger, with the recognition that whatever was happening couldn't be controlled or predicted. "I should go," she said, not moving. "You should," he agreed, his thumb tracing across her knuckles where their hands were still joined. Instead, she rose on her toes and kissed him. Soft at first, testing, then deeper when he responded with the kind of hunger that suggested he'd been thinking about this since the moment they met. His hands slid into her hair, holding her like she was precious and necessary all at once. When they broke apart, both breathing hard, he rested his forehead against hers. "I have a confession," he said quietly. "What?" That night, as he traced patterns on her skin in his hotel room, he whispered the words that would haunt her for decades. "I can't have children. Medical issue from when I was young. Is that going to be a problem?" They called the pregnancy a miracle, until the day he decided it was evidence of betrayal. San Francisco, California, March 2006. The ultrasound screen showed 2 heartbeats, strong and steady, pulsing like tiny drums in the darkness of Tasha's womb. She squeezed Cole's hand, tears of joy streaming down her face, while he stared at the monitor like it was displaying his worst nightmare instead of their greatest blessing. "Twins," Dr. Martinez announced cheerfully, adjusting the wand to get a better view. "Both appear healthy and developing normally. Congratulations, you two. This is quite special." "How special?" Cole's voice was tight, controlled in the way Tasha had learned meant he was fighting panic. "Well, given your medical history, Mr. Whitman, I'd say this is remarkable. The accident you described from childhood, the infection that affected your fertility. It's rare, but not impossible for natural conception to occur. You beat some pretty long odds here." Tasha felt Cole's hand go rigid in hers. They'd been married for 8 months, and she'd never seen him look so pale. "What kind of odds?" "Oh, maybe 1 in 100,000? Maybe less. But here you are, expecting 2 healthy babies. Sometimes the body heals in ways we don't fully understand." As they left the clinic, Cole was unusually quiet. He held her hand, but his grip felt mechanical, his smile forced. In the car, she tried to bridge the growing distance between them. "Can you believe it? 2 babies, Cole. We're going to have twins." She placed his hand on her barely visible bump. "They're already fighting for space in there. Just like we used to fight over the last piece of pizza." He pulled his hand away. "How do you feel? Any morning sickness?" The question felt clinical, like he was interviewing a patient instead of talking to his pregnant wife. "Some. But I'm mostly just excited." "Aren't you?" "Of course." But his eyes were focused on the road, not on her. "It's just unexpected. Good unexpected or bad unexpected." He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. "I don't know yet. When doubt creeps into love, who do you believe? Your heart or your fears?" Share your thoughts on trust in relationships. Over the following weeks, Cole threw himself into preparing for the babies with the same methodical approach he used for business deals. He researched cribs and car seats, calculated college costs, and turned their spare bedroom into a nursery with military precision. But he never touched her belly anymore, never talked to the babies the way she did, whispering promises and stories during her morning coffee. Instead, she caught him studying her when he thought she wasn't looking, watching her interactions with other men, their mailman, the grocery clerk, even his own business partners, with a suspicious intensity that made her skin crawl. "I went to lunch with Sarah today," she mentioned one evening over dinner, referring to her best friend from college. "Which Sarah?" The question came too quickly, too sharp. "Sarah Mitchell. You've met her a dozen times, Cole. She's married to David, the accountant. They're expecting their first child, too." "Right. Sarah." He pushed food around his plate without eating. "Anyone else there?" "Just us." "Why?" "No reason. Just curious about how you spend your days." The conversation died there, leaving them eating in silence that felt more like interrogation than intimacy. Later that night, as she brushed her teeth, she caught him going through her purse. When she confronted him, he claimed to be looking for antacids. The night before the twins were born, she woke to find Cole staring out their bedroom window at the city lights below. His shoulders were tense, his hands clenched at his sides like he was preparing for battle. "What if they don't look like me?" he asked without turning around. "What do you mean? What if everyone was right about what's possible? What if the doctors were wrong about my chances? What if—" He trailed off, but she heard the unfinished question hanging between them. "Well, they're not mine. Cole, look at me." She struggled to sit up, her pregnant belly making movement difficult. These babies are yours. I've never been with anyone else. Not since our wedding night. Not before our wedding night. Not ever. But the odds. Forget the odds. Look at me. Really look at me. Her voice broke on the words. Do you really think I'm the kind of woman who would lie about this? Who would trick you? Who would destroy our marriage with lies? He finally turned toward her, and in the dim light from the window, she saw something that terrified her more than his suspicion. Doubt. Not just about the pregnancy, but about her. About them. About everything they'd built together. I want to believe you, he whispered. Then believe me. She didn't know yet that wanting wasn't enough. That doubt, once planted, grows faster than love. That by morning, when their sons took their first breaths, Cole would be looking for proof of betrayal instead of celebrating the miracle of their existence. She didn't know that doubt was about to birth destruction. Love died the day he looked at his newborn sons and saw betrayal instead of miracle. The maternity ward should have been filled with joy, but silence stretched between them as Cole refused to hold his sons, studying their faces for proof of his suspicions rather than signs of his love. Marcus arrived first, screaming his displeasure at the cold world, followed 20 minutes later by Michael, who entered quietly, as if sensing the tension in the room. Both boys had dark hair like their parents, tiny fists that gripped with surprising strength, and eyes that would eventually turn the warm brown of Tasha's family. But Cole saw none of the wonder that should accompany first-time fatherhood. Instead, he stood beside the hospital bed like a detective examining evidence. They're beautiful, the nurse said, placing Marcus in Tasha's arms while Michael slept in the clear plastic bassinet. Dad, would you like to hold him? Not right now, Cole replied, his voice flat. I'm still processing. Processing. Like their children were data points instead of tiny humans who just entered the world. Tasha felt something cold settle in her chest. A fear that had nothing to do with new motherhood and everything to do with the stranger her husband had become. Look at them, she pleaded, exhaustion making her voice hoarse. Look at their hands, their little ears. Marcus has your stubborn chin already. That's what you want me to believe. Cole's words cut through the post-birth euphoria like shattered glass. It's not what I want you to believe. It's what's true. He turned away from the bassinets, staring out the window at the parking garage below. The timing doesn't work, Tasha. The conception date, my medical history, the odds Dr. Martinez mentioned. None of it adds up. Since when do you believe more in statistics than in me? Since statistics don't lie. The accusation hit her like a physical blow. She just spent 14 hours bringing his children into the world, her body torn and exhausted from the effort, and he was questioning her faithfulness, questioning the very foundation of their marriage.
Don't say their names. The words came out harsher than he intended. Why? Because it hurts? Because it reminds you that you have two other sons you've never bothered to know? They'd be in college now, wouldn't they? Do you even know where they go to school? What they're studying? Whether they're happy? He didn't. In 20 years, he'd never once tried to contact the boys he'd convinced himself weren't his. Never sent a birthday card or Christmas present. Never wondered if they played sports or liked art or struggled with math. He'd erased them so completely from his life that sometimes he forgot they existed at all. Until moments like this, when the weight of his abandonment felt like drowning. After Sophia left, taking James and the last remnants of a life Cole had built on lies, he wandered through the empty penthouse like a ghost haunting his own existence. The furniture was the same, the view unchanged, but everything felt hollow, echoing with the voices of children who'd learned to stop calling him daddy. His phone rang, creditors, lawyers, reporters wanting statements about his company's collapse. He let them all go to voicemail, staring instead at a photo he'd kept hidden in his desk drawer for 20 years. Tasha holding newborn twins in a hospital bed, her face glowing with exhaustion and joy. Standing in his son's empty bedroom, surrounded by toys that would never be played with again, Cole made a decision that terrified him more than prison, more than bankruptcy, more than starting over with nothing. He was going back to Ohio, back to the woman he destroyed, back to beg for what he had no right to ask for, forgiveness. Some bridges you burned so thoroughly, You forget there was ever another side, until you're drowning and need a cross back. The rental car felt like a confession booth as Cole drove through Columbus streets, past the life he'd discarded, toward a door he prayed would open. James slept in the car's seat beside him, exhausted from their cross-country journey and blissfully unaware that his father was about to face the greatest reckoning of his life. 20 years. 20 years since he'd walked away from this city, from the woman who'd loved him completely, from the sons who'd inherited his stubborn chin and her fierce heart. The Columbus he remembered was smaller, grittier, full of working-class neighborhoods and people who knew how to survive disappointment. Now it looked different, revitalized, confident, thriving in ways that suggested the city had healed from whatever wounds time had inflicted. Unlike him, the GPS guided him through streets he'd once known by heart, past the coffee shop where he'd proposed to Tasha, past the park where they'd talked about baby names and nursery colors, and the future they were sure belonged to them. Everything looked the same, but felt foreign, like visiting a museum of his own discarded life. "Are we there yet, Daddy?" James stirred in his seat, rubbing sleepy eyes that were exactly the same shade of brown as his half-brother's. "Almost, buddy. Just a few more minutes. Will the lady be nice to me?" The question hit him like a physical blow. James had been asking variations of it for 3 days, ever since Cole had explained they were going to meet some very important people. How do you tell a 4-year-old that you're about to introduce him to the family you abandoned before he was born? How do you explain that the lady they're visiting might slam the door in your face because you destroyed her life? She's a very special person," Cole said carefully. "She might be surprised to see us, but I think she'll like you very much. If someone who destroyed you came back broken and begging, what would your first words be? Comment below with your honest reaction." The address he'd found through a private investigator led to a tree-lined street in German Village, where restored brick houses sat behind white picket fences like something from postcard. Tasha's house was modest but beautiful, window boxes full of flowers, a small garden visible in the backyard, wind chimes singing on the front porch. It looked like happiness, like the life she'd built without him, better and more authentic than anything they'd shared together. Cole sat in the car for 10 minutes, engine running, watching lights move behind her windows. She was in there, living her life, probably having dinner or watching television or doing any of the 1,000 small things that made up a normal evening. He was about to shatter that peace with his presence, drag his chaos into her carefully constructed world. But he was out of options. His company was gone, his reputation destroyed, his assets frozen by federal investigators. Sophia had taken James and moved across the country, cutting off contact except for court-mandated visits that felt more like supervised torture sessions. He had nowhere to go and no one to turn to except the woman he'd hurt most. "Daddy, I need to use the bathroom." The simple request forced him out of the car and up the walkway to her front door. James's small hand in his felt like an anchor to whatever courage he had left. November rain drummed against the porch roof, and through the windows, he could see the warm glow of a life that had learned to exist without him. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. Once he crossed this threshold, there would be no going back. No pretending the past 20 years hadn't happened. No avoiding the reckoning he'd spent 2 decades running from. James looked up at him with trusting eyes, waiting. Cole knocked. The door opened, and suddenly he was face to face with the woman whose life he'd shattered, whose trust he'd destroyed, whose love he'd thrown away like garbage. She was older, obviously, but beautiful in a way that had deepened rather than faded. Her hair was shorter, silver threading through the black, and her eyes held a strength that hadn't been there when they were young. She was about to slam the door when James stepped forward. "Are you my daddy's friend?" he asked innocently. Looking into eyes that mirrored her own son's, she felt her world tilt. This child was living proof that everything Cole believed about himself had been wrong. Nothing prepares you for the moment when your ex-husband's child calls you grandma, and means it. Her living room filled with 20 years of awkward silence, while a little boy played with toys that once belonged to his half-brothers, unaware he was sitting in the center of a family earthquake. Tasha had let them inside mostly because of the rain, but also because James had looked at her with such innocent trust that slamming the door would have felt like cruelty. Now she sat across from Cole in the space she'd made her own, walls covered with her artwork, photos of Marcus and Michael graduating high school and starting college, evidence of a life lived fully despite his absence. He looked older, worn down by whatever had brought him back to her door with his hat in his hand and desperation in his eyes. "So," she said finally, her voice carefully controlled. 20 years. That's quite a gap between visits." "Tasha, no." She held up her hand. "You don't get to Tasha me. You don't get to sit in my living room and act like this is some kind of friendly reunion. You destroyed my life, took my children's father away from them, and disappeared. So before you say another word, you're going to explain why you're here and why I shouldn't call the police." James looked up from the toy cars he'd found in a basket by the couch, toys she kept because she couldn't bear to throw away anything that had belonged to her boys. "Daddy, why is the lady mad?" "She's not mad, buddy. She's just surprised." "I'm not surprised," Tasha said coldly. "I am furious. There's a difference." Cole shifted uncomfortably, his hands clasped so tightly his knuckles had gone white. "I know you have every right to hate me. I know I have no right to ask for anything from you. But I didn't have anywhere else to go. What about your Miami Beach penthouse? Your tech empire? Your young girlfriend who was supposedly worth destroying our marriage for? Gone. All of it." His voice cracked slightly. "The company collapsed. Sophia left. The feds are investigating financial irregularities. I lost everything. When children innocently reveal adult secrets, how do you handle the truth? Parents, how do you navigate these complex situations?" "Good." The word came out harsher than she'd intended, but she didn't take it back. "Now you know what it feels like." James had found a photo album on the bottom shelf of her coffee table and was flipping through it with the fascination children have for pictures. "Daddy, look. There are boys who look like me." The room went dead silent. Tasha watched Cole's face go pale as his son held up a photo of Marcus and Michael at age 4, their gap-toothed grins identical to the smile currently lighting up James's face. "James," Cole said carefully, "put that down. But they look just like me. Are they my brothers?" The innocent question hung in the air like a bomb waiting to explode. Tasha looked at Cole, watching him struggle with how to answer, how to explain the inexplicable without revealing his own cowardice. "Yes," she said finally, her voice soft. "They are your brothers." "Where are they? Can I play with them?" Before Cole could answer, the front door opened, and her 20-year-old twin sons walked in from college. The room froze as 3 generations of Whitman men stared at each other. 2 sons seeing their father for the first time in decades. One father seeing the men his children had become without him, and one little boy who'd just discovered he wasn't alone in the world after all. Marcus spoke first, his voice carefully controlled. "Well, this is interesting." 20 years of father-son conversations happened in the silence before someone finally spoke. The kitchen table that had hosted homework sessions and birthday cakes now held the weight of broken promises and stolen time for adults trying to navigate the ruins of what should have been. Marcus and Michael sat across from their father like they were facing a stranger, which, in every way that mattered, they were. James had attached himself to Michael immediately, fascinated by this older version of himself who patiently answered questions about college and showed him pictures on his phone. The innocent connection between half-brothers made the tension between the adults even sharper. "So," Marcus said finally, his voice carrying the careful control he'd learned from his mother. 20 years. That's got to be some kind of record for worst father of the year. "Marcus," Tasha warned, but he wasn't finished. "No, Mom. He gets to sit here in our house with his new kid, acting like showing up makes up for missing our entire lives. I want to hear his explanation." Cole looked at his eldest son, taller than him now, broader through the shoulders, with the kind of quiet confidence that came from being raised by a strong woman. "I don't have an explanation that would satisfy you. I made a choice based on fear and doubt, and I've regretted it every day since. Every day." Michael's voice was softer than his twins, but no less cutting. "Because we try to find you when we turn 18. Did you know that? We hired someone to track you down because we thought maybe you wanted to see us, but didn't know how to reach out. The confession hit Cole like a physical blow. You look for me? For about 6 months. Then we found out about your perfect life in Miami. The penthouse, the new family, the interviews where you talked about your fresh start and never once mentioned having other children. Marcus's jaw was tight. That's when we stopped looking. James, oblivious to the adult pain surrounding him, climbed into Cole's lap. Daddy, why do my brothers look sad? How do you rebuild trust that was shattered decades ago? Is forgiveness always possible, or are some betrayals too deep? Share your family healing stories. Because I hurt them a long time ago, buddy. Before you were born. Can you say sorry? The simple wisdom of a 4-year-old cut through 20 years of complicated emotions. Cole looked at Marcus and Michael, seeing not the 3-year-olds he'd abandoned, but the men they'd become without him. Successful, educated, emotionally healthy despite his absence. I'm sorry, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry for walking away. I'm sorry for doubting you were mine. I'm sorry for missing your first steps and your first words and every birthday and Christmas and graduation. I'm sorry for being a coward. Sorry doesn't give us back 20 years, Marcus replied. No, it doesn't. And I know I have no right to ask for anything from either of you. But I'm hoping maybe I can earn the chance to be in your lives now. Not as the father you needed then, but as whatever you're willing to let me be. Michael was quiet for a long moment, studying the man who'd provided half their DNA, but none of their guidance. You don't get to call us son, he said finally. You don't get to walk in here with your new kid and pretend 20 years didn't happen. You're right, Cole replied. I don't deserve that title, but I'm hoping maybe I can earn it. The silence that followed was broken by James's sleepy voice. Can I have a snack? I am hungry. Tasha stood up, grateful for the interruption. Of course, baby. What would you like? As she moved around the kitchen, preparing a plate of crackers and cheese for James, the others watched her with different expressions. Cole with longing and regret, Marcus and Michael with protective love, James with the simple trust of a child who'd found his family. When little James fell asleep on the couch, curled against Michael like they'd known each other forever, something shifted in the room. The anger was still there, the hurt and betrayal still raw, but underneath it was something new, possibility. He needs stability, Tasha said quietly, looking at the sleeping child. Whatever this is between us, we figure out for him. He didn't ask for any of this mess. Cole's eyes filled with tears he'd held back for years. For the first time since walking back into their lives, he felt something that wasn't despair, hope. Sometimes the enemy of your enemy is your ex-husband, and sometimes that's exactly who you need. The guest room hadn't been used since her mother's visits, but now it held a single father and his son, their few belongings unpacked like question marks throughout her carefully ordered life. Tasha stood in the doorway watching James sleep in the twin bed, his breathing soft and even, one arm wrapped around a stuffed elephant that had belonged to Marcus 20 years ago. Thank you. Cole's voice came from behind her, quiet enough not to wake his son. I know this can't be easy for you. It's not about me. It's about him. She nodded toward the sleeping child. He's innocent in all this. He deserves better than watching his father fall apart. I'm not falling apart. She turned to face him, noting the lines around his eyes, the way his expensive clothes hung loose on his frame, the tremor in his hands when he thought no one was looking. Really? Because from where I'm standing, you look like a man who's lost everything that mattered and is trying to figure out how to keep breathing. The accuracy of her assessment seemed to surprise him. How do you do that? Do what? See through me like that. You always could. 20 years of wondering what went wrong teaches you to pay attention to details. She moved away from the doorway, putting distance between them in the narrow hallway. We need to talk about arrangements. Ground rules. When you open your home to help a child, even if it means facing your past, what's the right choice? How do you separate the innocent from the guilty? They settled in the living room with coffee that neither of them really wanted, the space between them on the couch carefully measured to avoid accidental contact. Outside, Columbus slept peacefully, unaware that inside this modest house, two people were trying to negotiate the terms of an impossible situation. This is temporary, she said, until you figure out what's next. A few weeks at most. I understand. You don't bring your chaos into my house. No reporters, no lawyers, no drama for whatever legal trouble you're facing. James doesn't need to see that. Agreed. And you don't expect anything from Marcus and Michael. They're adults. They make their own choices about whether to have a relationship with you. You don't push, you don't guilt them. You don't use James to manipulate them.
Cole nodded, though something in his expression suggested that last rule hit close to home. What about us? He asked quietly. What about us? I mean, how do we handle being in the same space? The history between us, the way we... He trailed off, but she knew what he wasn't saying. The way they'd always been drawn to each other, even when logic said they should run in opposite directions. The way her pulse still quickened when he was close, despite everything he'd done to destroy them. We're adults, she said firmly. We act like adults. We focus on James and keep our personal history out of it. But even as she said the words, she was aware of him beside her. The familiar scent of his cologne, the way he held his coffee cup, the nervous habit he had of running his hand through his hair when he was thinking. Her body remembered things her mind had tried to forget, and that was dangerous territory for all of them. Tasha, her name on his lips, sounded like a prayer. I need you to know. Don't. She stood up abruptly, breaking whatever spell was settling over them. Don't make this about us. It's not about us anymore. 2 weeks later, she found him in her art studio at midnight, surrounded by paintings she'd never shown anyone. Portraits of him through the years, capturing the love she couldn't forget and the anger she couldn't release. He stood before a canvas titled Ghost, painted during the worst of her grief, showing a man walking away while a woman and children reached after him with empty hands. I painted you angry, she whispered, not looking up from the palette she was cleaning. I painted you cruel. I painted you leaving over and over again. But I could never paint you gone. The heart has no statute of limitations on love, but it keeps perfect records of pain. The back porch swing creaked with familiar rhythm, the same place where they'd planned their future decades ago, now holding the weight of their shared regrets under October stars. James was asleep upstairs, exhausted from a day spent learning about his half-brothers and exploring the neighborhood with the wonder of a child discovering he belonged somewhere. Tasha pulled her sweater tighter against the autumn chill, aware of Cole beside her in a way that made her angry at herself. 3 weeks he'd been living in her house, and she still couldn't ignore the way her skin buzzed when he was close, the way her body betrayed 20 years of healing with simple recognition. He's good with them, Cole said quietly, watching the window where Marcus and Michael were doing homework at the kitchen table. They'd driven down from Ohio State for the weekend, drawn back by curiosity about their half-brother and something that might have been forgiveness beginning to grow. They're good with him, she corrected. There's a difference. Is there? Because from where I'm sitting, they're being kinder to my son than I have any right to expect. That's because they learned empathy from watching their mother survive betrayal. They know what it feels like to be abandoned by someone who should have protected them. The words hit their target. Cole flinched, his hands gripping the swing's chains tighter. Can love survive the worst betrayal? When someone admits they were wrong 20 years too late, is forgiveness healing or foolish? Tell me what your heart says. I was terrified, he said finally, the word coming out like a confession he'd been holding in for decades. Not of the children not being mine, but of them being mine and me failing them like my father failed me. So, instead you abandoned them. You became exactly what you feared. I know. You destroyed my reputation, took everything we'd built together, and convinced yourself I was a cheater because it was easier than accepting responsibility for your own children. I know. You left 3-year-old boys asking why Daddy didn't love them anymore, and I had to explain abandonment to children who weren't old enough to understand betrayal. His voice broke. I know. The simple acknowledgement carried more weight than elaborate apologies or desperate justifications. For 20 years, he'd been defending his choices, rationalizing his fears, building walls around the truth of what he'd done. Now, sitting in the wreckage of all their lives, there was nowhere left to hide. Why? The question she'd carried for 2 decades finally found voice. Why was it easier to believe I was unfaithful than to believe you were capable of fatherhood. Because I loved you. The answer surprised them both. Because loving you meant I could lose you. And if the children weren't mine, then I could walk away before you realized I wasn't worth staying for. That's the most selfish thing I've ever heard. It is, but it's also the truth. He turned toward her on the swing, and in the porch light, she could see tears he wasn't trying to hide. I was 28 years old, building a company from nothing, trying to prove I was more than my father's son. And then you got pregnant, and suddenly everything I thought I knew about my body, my limitations, my future was wrong. So you chose doubt over faith, fear over love, pride over family. Yes, the admission hung between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. His honesty was brutal and necessary, but it didn't erase 20 years of consequences. Didn't give back the birthdays he'd missed, the soccer games he'd skipped, the nights she cried herself to sleep wondering what she'd done wrong. I need you to understand something, she said, her voice steady despite the tears threatening to fall. I mourned you. I mourned our marriage, our future, the man I thought you were. I buried that love so deep I convinced myself it was dead. But it's not dead, is she? His voice was barely a whisper. She was about to go inside when he caught her hand, his fingers warm against her cold skin. If I could go back. But you can't, she interrupted, not pulling away but not moving closer either. The question is, what do you do with the time you have left? His answer would determine everything, not just for them, but for the family they might still become. Some love stories end with goodbye. Others begin again with I'm sorry and I forgive you. Thanksgiving dinner around her table looked like a patchwork quilt, mismatched pieces sewn together by love and time, creating something beautiful from fragments of broken dreams. Marcus had driven down from Columbus with his girlfriend Sarah, a pre-med student who treated James like the little brother she'd never had. Michael brought his roommate Derek, who'd become family through proximity and shared struggles with organic chemistry. Cole sat at the far end of the table, still careful not to assume too much space, still earning his place in conversations that had learned to flow without him. But James was beside him, chattering about the turkey he'd helped Tasha baste and the pie he'd attempted to make with Marcus's patient guidance. "Pass the stuffing, Daddy," James said, and the casual use of the word made everyone pause for just a moment. Not with discomfort anymore, but with recognition of how naturally families could reshape themselves around new truths. "I want to say something," Cole said as they finished the meal, his voice carrying across the table full of people who'd learned to be family despite him rather than because of him. 6 months ago, I thought I'd lost everything. My business, my reputation, my future. I was wrong. I'd lost those things 20 years ago when I walked away from this table, from these people, from the life we could have built together. What does a real second chance look like? How do you rebuild trust that took years to destroy? Share your stories of family redemption. Tasha watched him carefully, noting the way his hands shook slightly as he spoke, the way he looked directly at Marcus and Michael instead of avoiding their eyes. "I can't give you back the time I stole from us," he continued. "I can't undo the damage I caused or erase the pain I inflicted. But I can promise that whatever time we have left, whether it's days or decades, I won't waste it running from responsibility or hiding from truth." "What are you saying?" Michael asked. "I'm saying I want to be part of this family, in whatever way you'll have me. Not because I deserve it, but because you deserve to have a father who shows up, who stays, who fights for you instead of against you." Marcus studied his father's face for a long moment. "Actions speak louder than words, Cole. We've heard promises before. Then judge me by my actions. Give me the chance to prove that 20 years of mistakes don't have to define the rest of our lives." The silence that followed was broken by James's innocent voice. "Does this mean we're all going to live together forever?" Out of the mouths of babes came the question none of the adults had been brave enough to ask. "Well," Tasha said carefully, "forever is a long time, sweetheart. But we're figuring out how to be a family, and that's what matters." Later that evening, after the dishes were done and the others had gone to bed, Tasha found Cole in the kitchen, staring out the window at the backyard where James's toys were scattered across the grass like evidence of belonging. "Thank you," he said without turning around. for letting me stay, for giving me this chance, for not slamming the door that first night. I didn't do it for you. I know, but you could have called the police. You could have refused to let us in. You chose compassion over revenge, and that means everything." She moved to stand beside him at the window, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "I did it for him, and for Marcus and Michael. They needed to see that their father was human, not a monster. That he was flawed and broken, but not irredeemable. What about you? What did you need to see?" She turned toward him then, studying the face she'd once known better than her own. "I needed to see if the man I fell in love with was still in there somewhere, buried under all the fear and pride and stupidity." And this time when he touched her face, she didn't pull away. This time when he kissed her, soft and tentative and full of 20 years of longing, she kissed him back, not with the desperate passion of their youth, but with the deeper recognition of two people who'd survived the worst of themselves and found their way back to something that might be love. "He's still in there," she whispered against his lips, "beaten up and scarred, but still there." Their reunion was tender rather than desperate, reverent rather than hungry. This time when he touched her, she felt worship instead of taking, patience instead of need. In her bedroom, with moonlight streaming through windows that had watched over 20 years of her solitary healing, they came together like two people learning each other for the first time. "I don't deserve this," he whispered against her skin. "Then earn it," she replied, and showed him how love looked when it was built on truth instead of fear. 6 months after he'd knocked on her door, Cole knelt in the same kitchen where their marriage had died, holding a ring that looked nothing like the first one. Simple, honest, without the flashy declaration of wealth that had defined their younger selves. "I'm not asking you to forget," he said, his voice steady despite the tears in his eyes. "I'm asking if you're willing to remember differently, to build something new from the pieces of what we broke. 20 years ago, they promised forever and broke it. Today, they're promising imperfection and building something real." The backyard wedding looked nothing like their first. No designer dress or expensive flowers, just family gathered under string lights, celebrating love that had survived its own destruction and grown stronger in the rebuilding. Tasha wore a simple blue dress that made her eyes shine, while Cole had traded his usual expensive suit for khakis and a button-down that James had helped him pick out. Marcus and Michael walked their mother down the short aisle between folding chairs, their presents a gift she hadn't dared to hope for 6 months earlier. Sarah held James, who was practically vibrating with excitement of being the ring bearer, his gap-toothed grin lighting up the gathering of neighbors and friends who'd watched this family rebuild itself from the ground up. "We're gathered here today," the minister began, "not to witness the beginning of love, but to celebrate its resurrection. Cole and Tasha have learned that true commitment isn't about promising perfection. It's about choosing each other even when you're both broken. This is what second chances really look like, not erasing the past, but learning from it. If you've ever gotten a second chance at love, share your story in the comments below." The vows they'd written were nothing like the promises they'd made 20 years earlier. Gone were the declarations of eternal happiness and unshakable faith. In their place were words forged in the fire of real experience, tempered by loss and strengthened by survival. "I promise to doubt my doubts before I doubt your love," Cole said, his voice carrying across the small gathering. "I promise to choose faith over fear, truth over comfort, and presence over perfection. I promise to show up, not just today, but tomorrow and every day after that, until showing up becomes as natural as breathing. I promise to forgive without forgetting," Tasha replied, "to love without losing myself, and to build our future on the foundation of who we've become, not who we were. I promise to trust again, not because it's easy, but because love without trust isn't love at all." When James presented the rings with the solemnity of a child taking his job very seriously, there wasn't a dry eye in the small gathering. This wasn't just a wedding. It was a family healing itself, choosing wholeness over brokenness, choosing each other despite every reason to walk away. The reception was held in the same backyard, with Marcus's girlfriend Sarah providing the music from a playlist that mixed their old favorites with new discoveries. James danced with everyone, his joy infectious, and pure, while Marcus and Michael slowly warmed to the idea of having their father back in their lives permanently. "I can't believe you actually did it," Michael said to his mother as they swayed to a slow song. "Married him again after everything he put you through." "I didn't marry the man who left us," Tasha replied, watching Cole teach James how to spin Sarah around the makeshift dance floor. "I married the man who came back. There's a difference. What if he leaves again? Then we'll survive again. But I don't think he will. Some people need to lose everything before they understand what they had." As the evening wound down and neighbors drifted home, the family sat around the fire pit Cole had built in the backyard, James asleep across Michael's lap, exhausted from the day's excitement. The conversation flowed easily now, 20 years of silence replaced by the comfortable rhythm of people learning to be family again. "So what now?" Marcus asked, poking at the fire with a stick. "Where do you two go from here?" "Forward," Cole said simply, his arm around his wife, a title that felt both familiar and new. "We go forward together." Their grandson, now calling them both grandparents without any of the confusion that had marked their first meeting, fell asleep between his older brothers during the reception, surrounded by the family that almost never was. Sometimes love doesn't conquer all. Sometimes it just refuses to quit. The fire burned low as they talked about Marcus's upcoming graduation, Michael's internship application, and James's request for a puppy that would probably be granted within a month. Normal family conversations about normal family problems, the kind of ordinary magic Cole had thrown away once and would never take for granted again. "I have something to tell you," Tasha said as they prepared to go inside, her hand resting on her still flat stomach. "Something that changes our future again." Cole's eyes widened as understanding dawned. "Are you? We're going to have another baby." At 47, when I thought that part of my life was over, when I thought I was done with midnight feedings of first steps and all the chaos that comes with new life, the silence that followed wasn't filled with doubt this time, but with wonder. James stirred in Michael's arms, as if sensing the shift in the universe around him. "A baby," Cole whispered, his voice full of awe. "Our baby. Made from choice, not accident. From love, not doubt." This time, there would be no questions about paternity, no investigations or DNA tests, no fear disguised as skepticism. This time, he would be present for every moment, every doctor's appointment, every ultrasound, every kick and flutter and sign of a life they were creating together. If this story about redemption, forgiveness, and second chances moved you, smash that like button and subscribe for more stories that prove love can survive anything, even itself. Comment below. Would you have opened that door? Would you have given someone who destroyed you a second chance to make things right? Because sometimes the person who hurt you most might also be the one you've been waiting for. Sometimes love doesn't die. It just goes underground, waiting for the right moment to break through the soil and grow again. Until next time, remember, it's never too late to come home. It's never too late to choose love over fear. And it's never too late to build something beautiful from the broken pieces of what you thought was lost forever. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next story.